Hello and welcome back for another Torah Tuesday. I'm Dr. Carmen Imes, Old Testament professor at Biola University's Talbot School of Theology. If you are new to my channel, welcome. We're taking a slow trek through the book of Exodus and examining the riches of each verse in order. And today we are picking things up in Exodus chapter 21, verses 1 and 2. This is the beginning of what's known as the mishpatim. So let's dive right in. I'm reading here from my translation from the Hebrew. Now these are the decisions that you shall set before them. If you hire a Hebrew servant, he shall serve 6 years, but in the 7th he may leave freely at no cost. Now, that's not very much ground to cover, but we have a lot of bigger things to talk about because we're entering a new section of the text. So if you've been tracking with me, a couple of weeks ago, we released a video on the covenant scroll, kind of explaining the this wider section of the book of Exodus. And we are now partway into the covenant scroll. Last week's video introduced chapter 20, verses 22 through 26. And that is the beginning of the covenant scroll, but it's a different kind of law than what we have here today. So in 21:1, we have the introduction of a new section based on genre. So these are the mishpatim. I've translated that decisions in the sense of judicial decisions. The word mishpatim comes from the Hebrew word shofet, or shafat, which is the verb that means to judge. And mishpatim is turning that verb into a noun. So the mishpatim is a plural way of referring to the decisions that are made in a judicial setting. So we could call these decisions or rulings. Sometimes people call them case law or casuistic law. They come in an if-then format. If this is the situation, then here's how you are to respond, or here are the parameters for that particular case. Now, by definition, the mishpatim are dealing in the realm of less than ideal situations. And that's very important for us to notice at the outset. Sometimes people criticize the Bible for being pro-slavery. You have to read very uncarefully to come up with that conclusion, because here what we have are laws addressing non-ideal situations, such as debt servitude. So if someone owes a debt that they cannot pay, they are allowed to hire themselves out to the person to whom they owe this money, and they can work off their debt. These laws, the mishpatim as a whole, are intended to rein in the power of society's most wealthy so that they do not exploit the most vulnerable members of the society. So this is a situation with a major power imbalance. We have a landowner who's wealthy enough to employ someone or to have lent money so that someone is indebted to him, and he is being reined in so that he does not take advantage of someone in a non-ideal situation. Now, Israel's mishpatim are unique. There are other law collections in the ancient world that have this type of law, the if-then kind of case law. Israel's mishpatim are unique because they begin with servitude, and none of the other law collections begin with servitude. Why might Israel's laws need to start here? If you think about the historical context, they have just come out of servitude in Egypt. They've just come out of an exploitative relationship with Pharaoh and his overseers, and God set them free. If you're helping someone get on their feet again after a bout of alcoholism where their relationship with alcohol was not healthy, then the clearest parameters, the first parameters you're going to set up are going to be around the use of alcohol. If someone has a problem with terrible financial mismanagement, then you're going to focus first on helping rein in the spending that's gotten out of control. And in a similar way, because the Israelites have come out of a situation where they've been exploited, it's most important to make sure this never happens again. It wasn't their fault what happened to them in Egypt, but they need to make sure they don't turn around and treat other people the way they were treated in Egypt. Now, this section of laws, as we'll see, has really interesting parallels with the story of Jacob and Laban in Genesis 29 to 31. So as we work our way through this, keep that story in mind. Remember, Jacob wants to marry Laban's daughter Rachel, and he works for him 7 years in order to pay the bride price. And then Laban tricks him and gives his daughter Leah instead, and Jacob agrees to work another 7 years to get Rachel. So there's some really similar dynamics. This may be a background or may motivate the way the laws are framed. To use the word slave with reference to these verses is misleading, since the buying or selling of humans is prohibited, kidnapping humans is prohibited, and since strict parameters prohibit forced labor among the Israelites. So slave is not the best word to describe what's being regulated here. I would translate this as hire if you hire a Hebrew servant, not if you buy a Hebrew slave. I think that's an important distinction to make. There is a financial transaction here, but it's not because the person is property. It's because their labor is for sale. So I think hire is better than buy because the servant is offering his own labor to pay off a debt or to pay off the penalty incurred from a theft. So as we get into this passage, here's what we're going to notice about the parameters. Number one, this servitude is voluntary. Now there is an exception to that coming up, but we will deal with that next week. But this is voluntary servitude. It is temporary servitude. A master cannot enslave a person by keeping them for life. If someone wants to serve for a longer period of time or permanently, that's elective on their part, and we'll deal with that next week. So it's voluntary, it's temporary, it's interest-free. The master or employer, if you will, or the one who holds the debt, to whom the debt's being repaid, cannot keep racking up interest so that the servant is trapped in this cycle of only paying off or working off the interest and never working off the principal of the debt. This is an alternative to destitution. The alternative for if you cannot pay a debt and you fall into destitution is like you're homeless, you lose your land, you lose your family. This is an alternative to that, and it's oriented toward freedom. God does not say, hey, I have a great idea for all of you. You should go out and look for a Hebrew servant for yourself. Or you should try to gather as many people as you can to work for you. That's not what this is. The servitude is not being encouraged. In fact, it's being discouraged in the sense that it's limited, it's temporary, and the law is oriented around when the person can go free. So it's oriented toward freedom. This servitude is not generalized. This is not a whole class of people in servitude. It's also not racialized or based on ethnicity. There's not a certain ethnicity or race that's being pushed into servitude. It's not coercive. You are not allowed to capture someone and make them work for you, and you're also not allowed to take advantage of widows and orphans. These are all parameters that we're going to see in the rest of the covenant scroll. So when you read the covenant scroll as a whole, there are all kinds of guardrails that are set up to make sure that the servitude that happens is not exploitative in nature. Now, of course, there are plenty of people throughout Israel's history that violated these laws and exploited other people. That's a problem, but we can't say that God is sponsoring that problem. He is trying to prevent it here by setting up guardrails. The degree to which people abide by the rules is a separate question. It's worth noting that Deuteronomy 23 verses 15 and 16 allows slaves to run away or servants to run away. If someone runs away from their master, you do not have to return them to their master. That indicates that the relationship had become oppressive and it was no longer in the servant's best interest to stay. So I think that's an important part of the context. Also, we should note that the Hebrews are Yahweh's servants. These are the people who've come out of servitude in Egypt, and Yahweh isn't setting them free to do whatever they want. He's calling them into service of himself, and that is going to be a service that's life-giving. So they shouldn't enter into any kind of relationships with other humans that violate the nature of their obligation to serve Yahweh. Now, there's no way that we can cover all that needs to be said about slavery in the Bible in just a couple of short Torah Tuesday videos. So I want to direct you to 2 resources that can help you if you want more. One is a lecture that I did for Regent College on slavery in the Bible, and I will put a link to that in the description below, so you can check that out. It's about an hour-long lecture. I also did an interview with Dr. Sean McDowell for his YouTube channel where we talked about slavery in the Bible and covered some of the hot topics. Dr. McDowell is one of my colleagues here at Biola University. He leads our apologetics program, and his channel is great. There's lots of great resources there, and so that interview might be useful to you as well. Before you go, one more resource to share with you this week. And this is a textbook by Dr. Gary Schnittjer on the Old Testament narrative books. I've been sharing these past few videos about resources that Dr. Schnittjer has produced that I find really helpful. This is the last one I'm going to share with you, and it's his textbook on the narrative books. These are the books that come after the Torah. So if you've enjoyed Torah Tuesday and you want to keep moving through the rest of the Bible and you want a guide for that, this book covers Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings, and then Ruth, Daniel, Esther, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Chronicles. It's not super thick, just over 200 pages, and he's a great writer and has lots of narrative insights. I had the privilege of reading through this whole manuscript before it went to press and helping with the editorial process of it, and so I highly recommend it if you want another resource to add to your library. I hope that's helpful, and I hope you have a great week. I'll see you back next week for another Torah Tuesday.